Yeah, dear followers, today we are in Germany, in Bad Homburg. It's a close distance from Frankfurt. It's some kind of town in Germany, and we are with Nojang Khatami. Is a true pronunciation?
That's perfect.
Okay, Nojang Khatami is a scholar. And he's from Iran actually, but recently he was living in Canada.
Yes.
He lived in Canada for years. In the first place, I would like to introduce him to you. Nojang Khatami, he has a Ph.D. From the University of British Columbia, and now he's a postdoctoral fellow in the Goethe University, Frankfurt, and in the future he's going to be an assistant professor in the Department of Political Science in New York. Is it true?
That's correct.
Okay.
Fordham University.
Okay, Fordham University. Thank you so much. He's studying on the subject of Sufism. Especially, and in relation to the political thought.
Right.
Okay. Thank you for the coming here.
Thank you.
To interview with us. So, what do you think? What do you say about Sufism? And what is Sufism?
So, Sufism is a kind of approach, we might say, to Islam. It's a way of thinking about Islam. It involves numerous facets with regard to how people over time, ever since the time of the Prophet Muhammad, have sort of conceived of what it means to be Islamic. So it's not necessarily a distinct branch of Islam per se, but it's a way of approaching Islam. And one of the things that is particular to Sufism is the way in which it has grown and developed over time and has been expressed in many ways through certain artistic forms, which have given it a certain aesthetic quality. That is, much of the discourse of Sufism has come through poetry and through certain artistic expressions of what it means to have a certain close connection to the divine or to God or to Allah.
Maybe like in Christianity.
Yeah, some characterize it as a kind of mystical, as having some things in common with the mystical approaches to Christianity. And certainly it has some features that make it similar to that, right? But what is, I would say, fairly distinct about Sufism is, again, how many of those who have contributed to the discourse of Sufi thought, they've done so through theological and philosophical interventions, but also through a lot of aesthetic interventions, a lot of artistic aspects that are a part of it. And so this is, I would say, one of the features that makes Sufism fairly distinct. It's many adherents of Sufism try to have this close, almost personal connection to God or to the divine. And a lot of that is achieved through, for instance, through poetry, through things that have involved, especially in the case of Maulana Rumi, of dancing, right, with that notion of the whirling dervishes and so on. All of these sorts of rituals and parts of Sufism sort of contribute to that idea of trying to reach this closeness to God. The divine.
Exactly. The divine, yes. So thank you. So that's my second question. What is the significance of the political dimension of Sufism in your view?
Right. So one of the things about Sufism that I've sort of found to be particularly important is that because it is, by some, it's considered somewhat controversial or different from certain interpretations of Islam.
Traditional, maybe
we may say traditional, we may say orthodox approaches, right? Or also to
official, maybe in some countries,
right? Right, and also to sort of literalist interpretations of the Quran and of the Hadith and so on. Sufism is distinct largely in the sense that there is, according to many of the Sufi sort of adherents, in a way, there's more room for interpretation. There is a way to have a certain amount of liberty in how you interpret, for example, how you were supposed to behave as a Muslim. Right? And so this is one of the first and most important things, I think, that gives a certain political significance to Sufism, is that it has not always been accepted as a sort of, valid interpretation of Islam. There's been a lot of contestation, a lot of conflict in a lot of them. So just to give a few brief examples, and also, I mean, by the way, Sufism is massive, right? So there are many different iterations of Sufism, many Sufis, all the way from, Andalusia in southern Spain, North Africa, all the way over to, Bangladesh, for instance, and even farther. So it's difficult to encompass and to say that, all Sufis think the same way. But there are certain strains, I think, of Sufi thought that you can find in different Sufi thinkers, including, for instance, Ibn Arabi, as you can find many of them in Maulana, in Rumi, as well as Sufi poets like Hafiz of Shiraz in Iran. And so I think what sort of binds some of these thinkers together and gives them a political significance is that many of them, especially I would highlight someone like Hafiz, they were responding to the political authorities of their time. Right? Because they were contesting the what was supposed to be considered acceptable as a way for a Muslim to behave. And a lot of this, of course, had to do with that element of wine drinking that is involved in Sufism. So that's one form of contestation. So when you have religious and political authorities saying that wine is banned, many Sufis, again, maybe most vocally in the case of Hafiz, many of them would insist that, no, we want to live freely. We want to be able to drink wine.
Maybe this is the way for them to arrive to God. Maybe.
Exactly, right? It's a way of achieving a personal connection to God. That is fairly direct, and of course it's quite complex and deep, right? It doesn't just mean like just drinking wine, the physical act of drinking wine, but it has a sort of metaphorical significance. That sense of drunkenness, that sense of communion that you feel, these are all sort of ways to try to capture the possibility of having the connection to the divine. And so because of this, a lot of Sufis would insist that, these things can and should be permitted. You should be able to live your life this way and still call yourself a Muslim. And so naturally this also creates tension and contestation. It creates conflict because, different adherents of Islam will say that, maybe some of those aspects are not acceptable. And so this is what gives it a political edge, in my view. And I would even go farther to say that in some cases, Sufi writers and poets, they make a political case. In a way, they resist the political authorities by using the discourse of Sufism. So those are just some of the ways that I think politics and Sufism are connected.
Okay, so you presented a big paper yesterday about this topic in the context of Shiraz.
Hafiz of Shiraz.
Hafiz of Shiraz. So that's my last question. Can you say a little about some of the views of the Sufism with regard to the Christianity?
Absolutely, yeah. So this is, I think, one of the...
So it's important for me because I'm studying on, as you know, I'm studying on early Christianity especially. It's the most important question for me.
And we've already had some super interesting conversations about this, right? So when it comes to these sort of these lines of connection between Sufi thinkers and, for instance, Christianity.
Yeah.
And this is, I should mention, this is of course not just peculiar to Sufis, right? In so many different aspects of the discourses of Islam, you have these possibilities for connections that are alluded to, and so much of it, of course, is also in the Quran itself, right? When it comes to these references to sort of like the people of the book and so on, right? There are all of these acknowledgments of the significance of Jesus and so on, already within the discourse of Islam, right? So this is not to say that that Sufis necessarily are so distinct, or that they're doing something so different when they make these references to Christianity, because it's already part of other aspects of Islam. But one thing that I think is fairly distinct about Sufi poetry is that they insist a lot of times on saying that what we are doing, so for example, Maulana or Hafiz, when they say what they are doing, the way that they want to live their life, is actually directly akin to Christians. And that ultimately, we're not really that different, they would say. So just to give like one example of this, I think this is one of Hafiz's nicest poems, and he has a lot of them. Hafiz says, "In love, the Sufi gathering house and the tavern are no different. Wherever love is, there too is the radiance of the beloved's visage. The work of love, revered by Sufis, is equally found among monks in monasteries before their cross." Right? So when Hafiz says these kinds of things, he's saying that ultimately we're not really that different. So what the Sufis are doing is very similar to, as he says, the monks in monasteries. So the way that Christians will worship and try to have that connection to the divine.
So we can say is a close similarities and relation between Sufis and monks in monasteries.
Exactly, and of course there are several examples of this, right? So it's not only restricted to monks and monasteries. Hafiz also makes a lot of references to these notions of, the reverence for love that is found in different religions. And so, for instance, Hafiz also makes references to those who go to the mosque, those who go to the church, and those who go to the synagogue. And he says, again, ultimately, we are all in search of the same thing. Which, as he puts it, is, we are in search of the beloved, which can have, a reference to a human form, but it also has these ways of referring to the divine. So ultimately, we're all just in search of that. And again, and I think Maulana, Rumi puts it really beautifully as well when he says that we all feel a sense of estrangement. He says at the beginning of the Masnavi, in one of his most beautiful poems, that, just like the reed flute, right, the musical instrument that is torn from the reed bed, right, there's that sense of detachment. And so when you hear the reed flute, it's crying out because of that estrangement from where it came from. And Maulana says that we're all longing for that return. So anyone who has been removed from their place of origin will long one day to return. And so there's many layers to that, including, and I would say maybe even most importantly, a sense of connection to the divine. So we all feel sort of estranged from the divine or from the beloved, but through the discourse of Sufism, through this discourse of love, it's an attempt to get back to that, to try to return to our origins. And the Sufis would say that that's really only possible through love. And they try to achieve that through the poetry and through the discourses that they put forward.
So, thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you. This was great. I appreciate it.